Okay, folks, we're going to start on the final panel session here, which focuses on design innovation medical devices. And I'm going to introduce the moderator, Tracy McNeil. She's also been on the program committee for this expo. Thank you very much for your assistance, helping us pull all this together. It's been great, and also to Zymedica for being such an important part of the sponsoring of everything that we're doing here, not only in terms of the backup for services and things like that, but also for the participation in this panel as well. Tracy's is currently Executive Vice President for Corporate Development at Zymedica. She's got a very interesting entrepreneurial as well as large company background, been involved in mergers and acquisitions, business development, run her own company, and has been with Zymedica now for about, as I count, maybe 4 months? And so is digging into that space with that organization, and graciously agreed to lead this panel through a very interesting discussion this afternoon around various aspects associated with medical device design, innovation, capabilities, and facilities. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to start with thanking MedMates. It's a great time to be in Rhode Island. It's a great time to be part of the community and all of the volunteers. It was an incredible amount of work that went into putting this expo together, and I think it's just been a privilege to be part of it. I also want to thank all the people at Zymedica who came before me. Zymedica has been a co-conspirator with MedMates since the beginning, and we're really passionate about medical device development. I was talking to my mom this morning on the phone, and she said to me, Tracy, I'm taking a course in medical device design. My mom's 76. She's a retired French school teacher. And I said, really, what is it like? And she said, the first 2 weeks are the body as an electrical system. The second 2 weeks are the body as a mechanical system. And the last 2 weeks are the body as a chemical system. And so I said, well, that's funny. I'm doing a panel today on medical devices. She was like, well, tell me, is it going to be on TV? I said, I don't think so, Mom. But anyway, we've got a great group of panelists. You've got their bios, so I'm not going to read them to you, but I just want to say we've got Scott Stropke, who's a really representing design and innovation. Carl Dumas, who is really going to talk about software and how software plays into medical device design. John Gerald, who's going to talk about materials. And we have a sub. This is Bob Richard, who is standing in for David Bren, but also works in the same area of Sierra Bard. Sadly, didn't get his bio in there. So I wanted to let them introduce themselves really with a story. Guys, I'm interested to hear you tell the story of something that happened to you within the healthcare system and why you're in this game. Why are you in medical devices and healthcare? Bob, you want to start?
I'll start. Okay, sure. So I've been in medical device business for about 25 years, and to me, the reason I'm in it is the excitement that I really get around understanding the unmet clinical needs that are out there, and there are lots of them, and how we translate those into the devices that can help solve those needs. And I think one of the most challenging parts, and I think we're going to discuss this a lot, is around how do you design, develop devices that any surgeon can use. You have surgeons that have a lot of skill, some that don't have a lot of skill, some that do a lot of procedures, some that just do a few procedures. But you give all of them the same device, and they need to be able to use it. And it's really tough, it's really challenging, and then we're going to talk about human factors and a lot of the things that go into the thought process around how do you put something in someone's hands and make it almost plug and play. And so that's one of the things that gets me really excited about being in this business.
I'll go next because I think the clinical side is super interesting, but I got into it as an industrial designer in the sort of healthcare space when we were asked to design a nurse, or basically a call cord system for Lifeline, and I got put on a design research team and started to visit elders in their homes and learn about the usability issues that they face every day in every aspect of their life, let alone what it meant to admit that help was needed and then get that help to them in an appropriate way. So that experience on the user side of the equation was super powerful for me. So I decided that I wanted to spend a good chunk of my career working on the user side, the human-centered design side of medical device design.
I'm John Jarrell. I've spent maybe the last 30 years working on product failures. So I do failure analysis, and that's my perspective on the world. It's when things go wrong that weren't intended to go wrong. And so I've spent 30 years looking at when things don't go as they're expected, and have focused on medical device and drug delivery systems when they go wrong. Several years ago, I got a chance to go back with a scholarship from the Department of Veterans Affairs to Brown University to get a doctorate in biology, medical science, and engineering, a program they had. I took medical school courses. And what I began to realize is, as engineers, we really didn't understand the whole biological and medical perspective, and how there's such a need for people to bridge that gap between engineering and medicine, because we have completely different vocabularies, we spring from different historical kind of roots, and the big opportunities right now are where you are blending together, real physics, real engineering with, real biology and real medicine. I had a chance to see that firsthand. I realized there's a great need for new biomaterials. When I was at Brown, I realized that after all these years, we're still implanting people with 316 stainless steel that was, 150 years old. It's designed for marine applications. And Russian aircraft landing gear, titanium alloy, that's what we're using. And so there's a huge opportunity for new materials that were actually designed to be put in your body, unlike almost all the materials that are currently used in products today. So I'm excited for new biomaterials that can revolutionize existing devices by modulating the interface between those implants and the living tissue.
Hi, I'm Carl Dumas. I've been in the medical industry for about 10 years now. Prior to that, I did a lot of industrial robotics, and so my software always made stuff move. And about 10 years ago, I reached a point in my career when I said, do I want to go into IT type work where I just play with databases and it's not so fun and boring and everybody's lame? Or do I want to go into, continue into exciting things that move things and have pumps and motors, and I can see my software actually come alive inside of a device, and that's why I've been in it. And it's every day there's a different problem to solve, and I like to solve problems, and we have to do it in a regulated manner, and I like to do things organized with check boxes, so it's a perfect industry for me to work in.
That's great, and that's a perfect segue because we're going to talk about robotics. It's a really exciting part of medical device innovation. So Scott, there are telepresence robots popping up. I was at a networking event kind of like this, and I was talking to a CEO, and he said, "Hey, we've got this technology where you can actually. Do you want to see the inside of a hospital?" He pulled up his phone and opened the app, and I'm like looking in the neonatal unit. And he started moving the robot around, and he said, "You want to see what this robot looks like?" And I said, "Yeah." And you could literally see you could read the X-ray on the other side of the room. Like, that's how good the clarity was in the robot. And he migrated the robot across, and there was a mirror in the neonatal unit, and it would look like it was from the Jetsons. It's like a human-sized robot. It was really neat. So I'm curious what you're seeing, if you got any stories to share around your design experiences with robotics.
Well, that might have been a robot we designed. We have done a lot of work with iRobot over the years, and there was an interesting turn in their strategy to do an autonomous navigation system, and they're going to OEM a system to anybody that wanted to get anything around, and sort of an open platform. They asked us to help them envision applications for this robot, and we sketched up a number of medical applications, and one of those sketches got shown to the CEO of InTouch Health, and InTouch Health and iRobot created a strategic relationship to design a 5-foot-tall, human-sized telepresence robot for the care leaders to effectively invert the model of care. So right now we have to go to the specialist, but this robot would let the specialist go to the patient, wherever that patient was. So a doctor would use their iPad interface and engage the robot, say I want to see patient X. The robot would autonomously figure out using the hospital's information system where that patient was, get there, become the doctor, and then let that doctor, as the care leader, drive the team's care for that patient, that expert's care. So that is one application of robotics in the medical space that we've been involved in. We're involved in others. I think you are as well. Some of the things we can't talk too much about, but the ability to enhance human precision is phenomenal, and the ability to bring artificial intelligence to systems is it's going to result in remarkable improvements in care.
Yeah, it's incredible. Actually, on that point, Bob, you and I were talking earlier about how robotics is changing minimally invasive surgery. I'm curious if you want to share that with the audience.
Sure. So my company, we don't make robots, but we make implantable medical devices, many of which that are implanted using laparoscopic surgery. And if you don't know what that is, it's a minimally invasive surgical technique where they put a couple of small incisions in your abdomen, they put some tubes down it, and then they use different tools and manipulate those tools to perform a surgical procedure. It's a very advantageous surgical approach, just because the cosmetics, it only causes small scars. It results in a very quick recovery time, minimal surgical infection, and it's a very, very improved approach over open surgery. And so with robotics, one aspect of robotics in medicine is really around simplifying laparoscopic surgery. It takes a lot of training to be a good laparoscopic surgeon. Talked to a laparoscopic surgeon when I first started in this business. He said, until you've done at least 200 surgeries, you don't know what you're doing. And so it's very difficult, and some surgeons are shy, and they won't use the laparoscopic approach because they don't have the confidence. And then the result is that maybe there's some aspects to the patient's outcome that are less than optimal, because they could possibly incur the issues that I explained previously. So it really has revolutionized laparoscopic surgery, and I think it continues to do that. The products that we make are a lot for hernia repair. Hernia is probably one of the most common surgical procedures in the U.S. Probably about 1 million procedures a year. So it's and it really involves like a little piece of mesh like this that's used to patch your abdominal wall. A hernia is a defect in your abdominal wall. And so when you do that laparoscopically, it's almost like putting a bicycle patch on your tube, but doing it from the inside. So it's very complicated, and robotics has done a great job of simplifying things to make it more accessible to more surgeons so that they can reap the benefits that I mentioned earlier.
That's great. You should pass those around. They're pretty neat. So Carl, this is actually a picture of some of the stuff that we've been working on with the Titan robot, and it's a huge surgical robotic system that allows the surgeon to operate from some feet away. What kind of advice would you give to a team? At some point we had 20 or 30 people, right, working in parallel teams on this. Mm-hmm. What kind of advice would you give to a team that's going to be designing a complex system like that?
First, I'd tell them they need to double, triple, or quadruple the team, because that's nowhere near enough to develop a surgical robot. Not without some casualties. We had a few of those, gray hair, loss of hair, high blood pressure, heart attacks. It wasn't easy.
Nobody had a heart attack.
But yeah, it's an extremely difficult process. There was many different subsystems. The best way to develop a system like that would be to break each system down as small as you can and have a team associated with that subsystem until each subsystem was adult enough to come together as a full system.
Give me an example of a subsystem.
Well, as you can see there on the diagram, that's a surgeon, what we call the surgeon station. So that was one bigger level subsystem, but within that subsystem, there were the user controls, which all were all a system in and of themselves. The monitor is a 3D vision, so there's a set of cameras that go inside the cavity, stereo cameras, so that's a different subsystem. There's also, which is not on this one yet, but there's a heads-up display that appears on the 3D display that shows the status of all the tools that are in there. So there's many more, but each one of those subsystems was broken down, and a team would handle one of those subsystems, and then the teams would combine to the bigger subsystem, and eventually it all came together.
That's impressive. All right, well, we got a couple of other topics I want to cover. So we're going to move on from robotics. I want to talk about materials. Materials, like you were saying, has been a really exciting, and a couple of us have been in orthopedics. I think in the early years, it was like bone scaffolds, and some of the antimicrobial coatings were kind of coming up in there. But in the last decade, it's been amazing to see all these tissue developments. So I'm curious, well, let's see, where should we begin? Let's start with you, Bob. What are some of the new materials that you're seeing, and what do you find really exciting in the field of biomaterials?
Well, in biomaterials, a lot of the things that are happening are evolutions around taking materials that are permanent and making them non-permanent. And a simple example of that happened a long time ago is the suture. When sutures were first developed, they were catgut or simple plastic materials that were permanent. And if they were used in internal surgeries, they were left in there, and that can cause complications, it can cause infections, it can cause all kinds of issues. And then later, the absorbable sutures were developed, and I think everybody's probably either had them or knows someone that's had them. So I think one of the biggest trends is really to develop devices that are made from materials that can do the job, but then can go away when they're not needed anymore. And there's lots of different materials that can do that.
John, I know you got a lot to say about this. I'm curious, actually, this issue around long-term, I think long-term effects of implantables. As we're thinking about, some of the things you were talking about with stainless steel, you end up with wear debris, and we've seen that with recalls lately. I'm curious, and you've been doing some failure mode. What are you seeing in terms of the long-term impact of materials in the body?
I think one of the things that we're seeing more and more now and less willing to tolerate is the negative impacts of using materials that were developed many decades ago, including all the polymers that are used, that were developed before the FDA was regulating medical devices. We're somewhat stuck in a time machine right now where materials are in many ways locked into materials that are pre-1975. It would be like saying, you got to have a new car today, it's only has to be as good as a 75 Pinto. You would say, that's not acceptable. Because we've had great evolution in things like automobiles. But in medical devices, there's really an opportunity, if we can have a new regulatory environment, to introduce all of these great and wonderful materials that all these scientists have already been working on. I was at a Stevens Institute meeting not too long ago, a few years ago, all experts in antimicrobial materials and surface treatments and textures. And when we sat at that meeting, we got the bad news, essentially the FDA telling everyone in the room from all over the world that none of our innovations would be used because there wasn't a regulatory pathway to market that was financially viable for any of the products that we had. So I see the real innovations taking place when there is enough pressure in terms of the regulatory environment that will allow us to introduce new materials. So what are we experiencing now? I mean, problems we have like the large failure with the metal-on-metal hips have been in the news, where we went from having a well-known, well-identified polymer wear debris, which we kind of had well characterized and understood how it worked, to exchanging that for maybe less of this metal wear debris that we really didn't know much about, wasn't really well studied. And so I I think there's, like I said, tremendous opportunities for new materials and even just coating the existing materials so that the part that's touching the body was actually developed for the sole purpose of being in contact with your body. And that is not the case with almost all products, all normal biomaterials. It tends not to be the case. The polymers, the plastics, the metals were designed for something else.
So you said something that's pretty interesting, and I don't know if everybody, it's a broad range in the audience, and I just want to zoom in on it a little bit. The regulatory pathway, typically in FDA, and correct me if I'm wrong, typically is around a specific device, right? So if you're going to do a 510K filing, it's referencing another device that's come before. And the problem with a new material is it could go into a variety of devices, right? So what are some of the other problems around the regulatory pathway that new materials are running into?
Certainly. The biggest issue, I think, is that if you want to introduce a new material, the FDA doesn't regulate the material. They regulate a device which incorporates the material. So you want to introduce a new material? Great. Do all the testing for a new device that you're going to bring to market. You do all the biocompatibility testing, all the testing that's necessary to bring a new device in. You bring it in, and you have a new material for one device. So to begin to try to get wide acceptance is exceedingly expensive. You've got to continue to go through the regulatory process for maybe for orthopedics, maybe for different types of orthopedics. There's not a lot of carryover when you get something approved in one area to have it then used somewhere else.
Right. So for the business people in the audience, is the difference between launching something in 18 months or maybe 5 years. So, and doing it that way every time you're going to launch a new product with that. So it's a business question for sure.
Yeah, I think the regulatory environment right now encourages the uses of old technologies in innovative ways, but in terms of the materials, it encourages the use of very same old materials, but in innovative ways.
Right. Well, so antimicrobial coatings are more accepted, right? They've made it into the mainstream space. Bob, you and I were talking earlier about the collagen graft, right? I think that the audience would be interested to hear how that product has moved into the market.
Yeah, because I think antimicrobial materials are very important because surgical site infections are a big problem. And even though the occurrence is low, the cost on the healthcare system is extremely, extremely high.
Absolutely.
And it also has a huge impact on the patient. It can really be devastating to a person's life to have a surgical site infection, especially something that's associated with something that's already implanted in you. I mean, we implant these mesh materials, and if an infection occurs in this material, there's already a lot of tissue that's grown into it, and it's to remove it, it's almost like it's been equated, the best analogy I've heard is removing rebar from concrete. It's devastating to the patient. And it's really important to minimize that. It can probably never be eliminated completely. And one of the products that we make is a collagen implant that's used to repair the abdominal wall, especially in patients that have a lot of comorbidities. They may have diabetes, they may be obese, smokers, someone that has infection, maybe their bowel was compromised because of the procedure, so they have bacteria. And so there's a lot of issues there, and they don't want to implant something that's permanent, so they'll implant a collagen implant. The problem with that is that once those types of products get infected, the collagen materials, there's a lot of collagenases that are produced, and they will disintegrate the implant very quickly. So we developed, about 2 years ago, we launched a product that was a coating on the same collagen implant, but it was a polymer that had two different antimicrobial agents in it, and they would be eluted over time and modulated by the polymer. And what that did was protect the device from being colonized by bacteria. And it was really a very impactful product for us, and it's made a lot of progress in terms of trying to minimize infections. So I know there's a number of other products like that, and I think what John said is true. Coatings on an existing product can be very impactful, especially when they have something that will further improve the performance of the device. There's a whole area called combination products, which is just that, which is combining a device with an active agent that might deliver a drug that can locally have a very impactful result on the outcome of the patient's issue. Whereas you might think that an antibiotic, you can just take a pill, but sometimes taking a pill is not the same as the local delivery of the drug. So it's a very growing field, the combination device field.
As a side note, though, I'm curious how the cost of the antimicrobial coated collagen implant compares to something simpler.
Well, cost is a big issue in the industry, and there's a whole aspect of medical device which is called health economics and outcomes research. And while the device itself is could be 10 or even 20 times the cost of something like this, the overall cost to the healthcare system could potentially be less. And I think that's where healthcare economics come into play, where you really look at what's the whole impact of if something goes wrong, if there's an infection, if the patient has to stay for 30 days versus less than a week. What's the burden on the healthcare system? So one aspect is the cost of the device. The other aspect is the cost of the whole treatment. And I think that's something that's becoming more and more important to the healthcare systems.
Yeah, I think that's a really exciting place to watch. All right, in the interest of time, we're going to move on to our third topic, which is connected health, otherwise known as digital health, otherwise known as health tech. I have to say, it's the most exciting time that I've seen so far. It's just, but it reminds me of that old Reese's peanut butter cup commercial where, I don't know if you remember, where the guy's walking around with the chocolate bar and then bumps into the guy with the peanut butter and something fabulous was born. It's kind of like that with what's happening when tech is colliding with healthcare. So you're getting all this really exciting progress in mobile applications and wearables, like we were saying, drug delivery devices, but it's also got a lot of complexity, right? How do we regulate something that's connected? How do we deal with the cybersecurity issues? How do we deal with patient privacy issues? I think one of the earlier panels was talking about the amount of data that we can get off somebody's body. And what happens when it goes to a phone. So, at Zymedica, we see a lot of these products. We oversee a lot of the development of these products, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys about this. So, Scott, you're coming from a design standpoint. I'm curious, how do you, a lot of these products have apps that go with them, right? And a lot of the apps are made to try to help with the behavior and the adoption with the patient, right? So how are you finding making apps sort of sticky and work with patients?
So that's about connecting on each individual user's level in a way that makes sense to them and motivates them to adopt your technology and adopt the behavior change you're looking for. So that's really about deep understanding of user needs. We did a project a number of years ago for a startup company called WellDoc, and they had a technology to provide advice to diabetes patients, behavior advice that was proving to lower their A1C levels the same amount that drugs can or would, but after a few weeks of using their application, which is delivered on a cell phone at the time, patients were dropping off use, like each of us drops off use with any new app that we get, right? You have 2 or 3 weeks of high usage, then you start to forget about it, then 6 months later it's gone. And WellDoc was noticing the same adoption problem with their technology, even though it was showing clinical benefit. They asked us to help them figure out how to make the application stickier, I guess is one way to describe it. And we did some research with users about what really motivated them to adopt this technology and what the interface would need to do to get them to engage. So we had all these different ideas about the personalities of the application and your ability to choose the personality that made sense to you and your ability to choose different kinds of interfaces that would be more likely to be the kind of interface you'd interact with or want to interact with. And through that research, we gave Olak some advice about how to create a much more adoptable application on your phone, and we help them get it through the FDA. And before they had seen many of these devices, and actually it's now the first prescribable application. So your doctor, if you have diabetes, can choose to prescribe you a drug or choose to prescribe you this app. And it's got a CMS code, so it's really pretty groundbreaking.
So this is a regulatory question, Carl, but is that what the FDA is referring to as software as a device, or software as a?
It depends on how, it depends on what the software is doing. So if you have a device that, for example, you have a device and it attaches to your body, streams all kinds of data to your phone, and then your phone applies some analytics to it or some algorithm to it, then the medical device is actually your phone. But if this device had all kinds of sensors on it and had a red and green light, red, you're sick, blue, you're not sick, and you could look in the mirror and go, oh, I'm not sick, because it did all the calculations within itself, then that's the medical device. And if it transmitted after the fact that you're sick to the phone, then the phone is safe from a regulatory path, because the device itself is embodied, and all the calculations and all the information that it needs is in the device that's attached to you. So it could go anywhere, actually. You could send all the data up to the cloud, and then the cloud could do some calculations, and then give a prescription or give a diagnosis. And in that case, the medical device is up in the cloud. So it depends on where it is, but...
Yeah, I saw a presentation by FDA a couple of weeks ago, and they are changing so quickly, in my opinion. I guess that the regulatory folks in the audience might argue with me, but I see them becoming much more open to discussing with industry how to regulate, because our capability to develop digital technology is outpacing our ability to regulate it effectively, and they're asking industry for advice. It's an exciting time. So I think it's important for the folks in the audience that maybe don't spend a lot of time thinking about this, the difference between something like a Fitbit and a medical device. What's the difference? Why is one a medical device and one not?
One simple, I guess, explanation is that you can sense many things in all the wearable technology that we have available to us, and the kind of sensors that we're working on for some of our clients. And if you can determine from the sensor, like Carl was saying, that what to do, what your next step is, you're okay. If you are sending this information to the device, and the device is just, your phone is just telling you what the sensor is doing and not providing any action advice, you're okay. The minute, and this is why so many apps don't do anything of real value for us, you're not allowed to basically give medical advice through an app. Doctors give advice. Apps can only technically provide data that you or someone else has to interpret. So there's so much potential and so much good can be delivered through apps that start to give advice, but that advice is not currently allowed to be given.
Yeah. So a related kind of device would be something for those in the audience that have people with diabetes in their families, the continuous glucose monitors and the insulin pumps. Are obviously medical devices, drug delivery devices, and connected devices typically. Although they can send a signal to a parent or a caregiver's phone that'll have a readout. But it's an interesting space from a cybersecurity perspective, and we're seeing this with a lot of our clients, struggling to come up to speed with all the different ways that medical devices can be hacked. So, Carl, I think it would be interesting for the audience to hear you talk about vectors of attack and how you use those in designing a medical device.
So we look at cybersecurity at a high level, at a system level. If you look at cybersecurity at the end of your development process and then find an issue, it's going to be very expensive to mitigate it after the fact. So we look at it at the system level. Vectors of attack are simply like Bluetooth, your Wi-Fi connection, a serial port, but it also can be the terminal. If it's a big giant piece of capital medical device, the terminal that somebody sits at is also an area where an intruder could get in and do some harm. Other less known ones would be programming interfaces for the microprocessor, spy buses, RS-232 buses, things that we as developers put in the system for troubleshooting or for maintenance purposes. They all can be considered attack vectors. So if we look at it at a system level, we can mitigate a lot of those risks by maybe putting some of those things behind tamper-resistant seals, which it's not a software solution or electrical solution, but it's a solution. We do need that port there, so we'll put it behind a locked panel or a tamper-resistant seal or something to that effect. Whereas in the end, if we had that port open and then we found out, oh, we need to mitigate that, well, the mechanical guys and the ID guys are going to be like, oh, we got our stuff done. It's too nice. We're not going to mess it up now. So it would become a very expensive process to either redo that or to develop some software to fix all that.
It's fixable in software.
Age-old debate. I'm watching the time. Tom, I think we're running up against it, right? Okay. So I have one more question on connected health, and then I want to talk about I want to talk about incubators and some of the exciting things going on in Rhode Island. I was at a pitch event, judging some startups that had some great ideas, and there was one app for smoking cessation. And someone in the audience Googled, I guess they went on Google Play, and there were 500 smoking cessation apps already on the market. And I'm curious, there's this sort of like, oh no, not another app thing that's out there. And I'm curious what you guys think in terms of these apps. Are they really adding value? Can they add, what would it take for them to add value to the healthcare system? Anyone?
I'll give a start at that, and that is that you're right. It's the tools that are available to anyone with sensors and app design and our smartphones, as these amazing computers that we all walk around with, create a very interesting environment that's also very level. It's in the old days, corporations had technologies that they could drive to market with some relative safety, or at least in the time it would take anybody else to come up the same curve. That curve is flat now. So to be successful, I believe we're going to have to get better at sharing data and finding partners that are willing to go in there with us and find ways to create alliances that end up letting any individual win. There's too much competition. I think the future competitive space in these kinds of app-related products are going to be about collaborations and the sharing of data and the use of that data that is powerful for more than one player.
I love that answer. And it's a good segue into a broader conversation about collaboration, because I think, John, you know, one of the things I'm curious if you want to talk about, I think one of the hardest things when we're talking about innovation in medical devices is finding adequate space and resources for true innovation. And I thought I heard earlier you had some good news to share, so you want to...
Yeah, absolutely, yes. So, as an engineer who specializes in looking at product failures, you kind of want to start making your own eventually. You know, you think, I like to try to make some of our own products. And so in 2009, we applied for the Rhode Island Business Plan Contest. One of our companies won. It was biointerface. It was based on a coding technology that we developed. We continue to go forward with developing that technology and really encountered the different obstacles that exist here in Rhode Island if you want to take something that comes out of a university setting and begin to translate it into a usable, commercially recognizable product. And so we've been through that process ourselves, and we would like to help other people do it. You know, once you've done some of that, kind of my part's done. You know, once you translate a product, you kind of hand it over to different people. But there's a need for an ongoing pipeline of new products. And so we have launched a incubator. We have purchased the old IGT building, the GTech building in Coventry, and we have launched a 141,000 square foot co-working space and incubator. We've got plenty of parking. It's all clean manufacturing, hundreds of parking spaces. There is, lots and lots of space for manufacturing, because one of the things we see a need for is to kind of bridge these gaps in innovation to get you to the next level. So we want to have a place where you can first develop a product, a place where you can incubate that idea, and then often what you end up happening is if you have any level of success, the next set of scale up is just incredibly disruptive. So the advantage we have with this space is if you're successful and you're in 5,000 square feet and you now need 10, you don't have to stop your business, go find another location, reset up your process somewhere else. We've got another 5 for you. And if you're at 10 and you need 20, we've got 20. And if you need 50, we've got 50. And if you need more, it's time to go somewhere else, because
you made the big time.
You made it big time, exactly. So that's really our goal. It's right there. It's a co-working space. We call it BioSci Labs, and bioscilabs. I think it's .com, or org. I don't know which it is. There's some cars. You'll find it if you type it in there. But we've rolled it out. So it's starting really with the co-working space. We have teams of people there who know how to do translational work. We have people who know how to do issues with like CFO positions. We have laboratories that we're rolling out in there, scanning electron microscope, wet lab, chemistry labs, microbial labs. Our goal was to put everything you could find maybe at Brown or at the hospital for research in a completely commercial setting. And that's our goal.
Nice. Well, congratulations. And it's I think, a great example of how the system's working here in Rhode Island. So I think with that, we'll close and turn things back over to the Master of Ceremonies. Thank you guys very much.
I want to know more about your incubator space. It sounds so cool.